am Dr. Sonia Whitaker, National Director for Education Policy for Push for Excellence. I want to start out by sharing with each of you that the theme for this particular summit is entitled Shaping America's Education Agenda. And I want to be even more clear that, as is indicated in the next slide, Shaping America's Education Agenda, the theme came as a direct result of, as you will recall, during the last presidential debate, it was announced, the amazing commentator announced to the entire audience, and more specifically to the presidential candidates, that on that particular evening, they would cover the 6 most important topics, paraphrased, impacting America, impacting our country. And guess what? Education was not one of them. And don't just take my word for it. Beyond the impact of the pandemic on schools, there has been virtually no discussion, at least during the general election portion of the campaign, about substantive education reforms like the crisis of college affordability and what must be done to address the academic achievement gaps that exist, which have to be addressed in order to ensure that students reach their fullest intellectual potential. And so, as indicated on the next slide, I thought you would really appreciate it. Let's take a look at the education agendas from previous administrations. First, we have President Bill Clinton's administration's education agenda, which was rather entitled Goals 2000. And for your listening pleasure, I'll share, many of you will recall that Goals 2000 during President Bill Clinton's administration was to improve learning and teaching by providing a national framework for education reform to promote research, consensus building, and systemic changes needed to ensure equitable opportunities and high levels of educational attainment for all students, amongst many other objectives. With regards to the following slide, President George W. Bush's administration had, which I know you'll be familiar with, the term No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. And you will recall that the goal of the education agenda during President George Bush's administration was to close the achievement gaps by providing all children with fair, equal, and significant opportunity to gain access to a high quality education. And then we have the next education agenda, which was introduced during President Barack Obama's administration. And the first term was entitled The Race to the Top. And the second one was entitled, again, as you will recall, Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, with regards to Race to the Top, some of the key priorities relevant to that agenda was specific to the adopting of standards and assessments that prepare students to succeed in college and the workplace, building database systems to measure students' growth, recruiting, developing, and rewarding high-quality, effective teachers and administrators, and also a relentless focus on turning around lowest performing schools. With regards to the Every Student Succeeds Act, what occurred during the President Barack Obama's administration relevant to education was this act, which stated the purpose being, the title in particular was to provide all children specific opportunity to receive fair, equitable, and high quality education for the purpose of closing the academic achievement gap. And then during President Donald Trump's administration, with regards to his education agenda, during his first term, the focus was on school choice. And as many of us will recall, he did put forth a second term proposal, which expanded all options relevant to the topic of school choice. And more specifically, the verbiage in his proposed education was provide school choice for every child in America. I think that speaks for itself. And then with regards to his second agenda relevant to the second term, he indicated a relentless interest in having the topic Teach American Exceptionalism addressed. And more specifically, as it relates to that topic in particular, Teach American Exceptionalism some would argue, came as a direct result of this current administration's belief that a substantial number of young Americans have been taught to believe that their country is systemically racist and thus needs an overhauling. And so, with regards again to this second term proposed agenda, the desire was to make sure that students are taught American exceptionalism. With regards to President-elect Joe Biden's administration's education agenda, I'm going to refer you, if you haven't had an opportunity, to the Biden plan for educators and students and our future. That's where its plan is clearly spelled out. I have pulled out for you, I think, 5 of the most important topics, which right now his education agenda consists of support for educators by giving them pay, investing in our schools so that we can better meet the social, emotional, and health needs of the students that we serve, ensuring that no child's education or future is determined by the zip code in which he or she lives in, providing every middle and high school students a path to a successful career, and investing in our children as early as birth. It's time to set the agenda straight. I want to share one thing with you. I did some of the homework for you. I have taken the liberty of not just noting the bullet points for you, but really examining to great length the education agendas for each of the presidents for whom I had just described. And I saw some trends and patterns. And one of the trends and patterns that I saw consistently throughout their reports was topics associated, as you will recall, addressing the need to close the academic achievement gap, the improvement of low-performing schools, anything associated with equity. In many instances, somewhere throughout all of their agendas, those topics came up.
It's really important for us to talk about education at this time, especially given the fact that we have a new president, although somebody doesn't know that, but the fact that we have a new president who has a comprehensive education agenda makes me happy. He's also committed that the Secretary of Education will be a teacher, which also make us have quite a stark contrast from what we had in the previous administration. He's talked about tuition relief and all the things that we think are important. But there's some other things that we have to look at. Probably about at least a third of our young people are not in school 5 days a week anymore. They're learning, distance learning. And for some of them, it's easy, but for some of them, it's not. For some of those who have working moms, they may be at home by themselves. Are they doing their work? Are they doing something else? We really are letting our system fall apart. And I'm really frightened for our young people, because this is going to show up in testing scores and other things in 3, 5, 10 years. And when it shows up, the achievement gap is going to widen, not narrow. And we know that. Why is this being paid so little attention? Well, this administration doesn't care about education, as we know, the current administration. But we do know that Brother Biden has an ambitious educational agenda. And we know that his wife, Jill, is a community college professor. And so she will keep him on his toes. The other issue that is really important now, and we've seen this in the past 4 years, but we've especially seen it in the wake of our civic protests, is a lack of education for the American people about race matters. I had a young man tell me that he didn't believe there were 5,000 lynchings, but there were. Young white guy, very pleasant, but he didn't believe there were that many lynchings. The racial narrative needs to be woven into history. People need to know about those 5,000 lynchings. They need to know about Jim Crow laws. They need to know about redlining, because you can't understand the wealth gap until you really understand the racial history. And too many people simply do not.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malvo, for your continual leadership of Push for Excellence. And of course, Reverend Jesse Jackson, our founder, and all of the work that he's done across the years. We thank you for the vision of Push for Excellence, which is to inspire teachers, parents, and students to push for excellence, and to instill within the idea of every teacher that every child can learn, every child will learn, and every child should be pushed to the limits of their ability so that they might excel in education. We're looking to set the policy agenda for 2021 and beyond. We're in a digital world. We must reimagine how we educate our students at every level and how we engage parents and teachers to work together in this virtual remote world that we now live in. I'm excited because we have a truly committed, excited educator leading this policy discussion and leading our policy initiatives at Push for Excellence. And so we welcome you, Dr. Sonia Whitaker. You've been with us across the years. And in this role, I am clear. The one thing that will be on the Biden-Harris agenda will be education of children of color, children who are poor, and children who've been disenfranchised and without equity. Thank you so much for all that you do, and it does not yet appear what you will become and how education will unfold in coming days, weeks, and months. Thank you so much for your service and for your time.
I'd like to ask our panelists, can you talk with us a little bit? As we've indicated, the theme for tonight is Shaping America's Education Agenda. You busy people, can you talk with our listening audience, our viewing audience, about why this topic is of particular interest to you? I'll start with Dr. Elston.
The whole conversation around higher education was very much rooted in access. How do we get more students, an opportunity to get access to higher education? The problem was too few of those students were ever completing. And of course there were great examples of, minority serving institutions and HBCUs who had a historical mission of doing that work well. The problem was that, very few students, once they arrived at those doorsteps, were never finishing. And so when I think about this larger conversation around setting a higher education agenda, it's very much aligned with what I am doing, what my team is doing, and what our organization is doing at a national level. And I think it's very connected, not just, our name is Complete College American. And although our focus is overwhelmingly on what happens when students get to the doorstep of college, the reality is that it's very much interwoven with the K-12 system. And if we're thinking about economic recovery in this country, we're going to have to really think about what our processes look like, what our systems and our structures look like to close what we've been calling institutional performance gaps. We're no longer talking about achievement gaps and placing that situation on it's the student's problem, it's the community's problem. We know the issues that exist and the challenges that exist within our communities. But broadly, we feel like it is an obligation of institutions to serve them well. And I say we are serving more students better, but the question is, are we serving all students well? And to me, that's the conversation in this larger agenda.
And I can appreciate that, Dr. Elston and team here, this idea of a conversation about the institutional performance gap says that we move beyond blaming students, that we move beyond blaming parents, that we move beyond blaming communities to at the college and the university level saying that we're engaged in some in-depth analysis of what we can do to move our children to our young adults rather to the next level.
Higher education has become my specific interest, in particular HBCUs, because we know HBCUs are the backbone of our country and provide that stable and nurturing environment for such an essential population. It's what's so important to us because many of these populations, this population are at risk of not going to college at all, or not completing college. So HBCUs are there for those first generation college students, the 20% or more African American who are graduating and becoming productive citizens in society. And so I've taken it as a mission to fight this battle to assist HBCUs at every level. We met with the administration. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think there are aspects of education, of higher education, the secondary education, prepare them for higher education that we're really honing in on right now. So that's why it's so important to me.
I grew up in Georgia, and my mother was very clear with me that education was the great equalizer. She indicated that in order for her to not have to pick cotton every summer for the rest of her life, she went to college. And so it was emphatic in my household that this is, if you intend to do more with your life and pick up and run the baton, that you have to get your education. And so the struggle that I have is I have devoted 35 years to education. And what I have seen consistently is that there is this push to say, we want to make sure we're taking care of Black and Brown children, that they're getting the resources they need, that there's equity, and it's not happening. And it is recently that I've been really looking at the fact that the racism that exists within our school systems, it is a system. It is not an event. It is a system that is so deeply ingrained that it is woven into our expectations that when we try to break the system, it's viewed by others as unfair. And so my deep-rooted intent is to move us from watching our kids come to school unprepared for kindergarten and continue to let the system grow. So by the time they're in third grade, they're even more unprepared. By the time they're in fifth grade, even more so. And just trying to get them to college becomes an intense barrier. What my interest is I have worked with African-American children my entire career. I cannot, on my watch, continue to let this be. And so when you ask me about why am I here, this is my watch. I'm here for a purpose, and I will not sit by and let my children suffer. And so that's why I'm here. Today I had a intense conversation about high stakes testing and what it does to our brown and Black children when you label them as low performing consistently over and over again and think that's okay. And that's not okay. So I'm here because my intent is whatever we have to do to push an agenda that finally breaks the system and doesn't just continue with a series of events. That's where we need to head.
What we have to look at in terms of public policy is that we're making a choice. Race has come up so frequently in the past year since the lynching of George Floyd, etc., Breonna Taylor. We have to look at whether public policy should be race neutral, which is what is going to go to the Supreme Court because this court will not uphold affirmative action, or if it's going to be race conscious. Now, public policy has been race conscious as long as we've been here. Laws were passed to keep us from holding certain kind of occupations. But now many want race neutrality. And what Dr. Leek said earlier was the people who need it need to get it. If we're looking at really maximum productivity and closing the achievement gap, then we're looking at brown and Black and poor young people who are being sidelined, basically redlined, if you will, out of higher education. But I will guarantee you, Dr. Whitaker, that executive order is one of those that Joe Biden will throw away. And I don't talk to him every day, or even any day for that matter. But I'm certain, based on the approach that he's taken, that executive order will be gone soon. He already plans to come into office with a series of executive orders. What I'm hopeful about is that HBCUs get more support. And with Kamala Harris being a Howard University grad, I expect that there will be some changes and there will be some strengthening. And what we need in HBCU land is strengthening infrastructure.
Typically, our institutions are the least likely to be the beneficiaries of any resources. Too frequently, you see more funding going to think tanks than you do to people who actually do the work themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the biggest thing has to be, these problems did not start overnight. And we've got to support things that work. And I don't think it's an issue of innovation. It's an issue of scale. Mm-hmm. There are individuals on this panel that have done amazing work. And what tends to happen is the individuals who are doing great work for the most vulnerable minoritized students have the smallest megaphone in this conversation. And so part of what I would expect in this conversation is definitely a focus on resources for institutions, but also resources for individuals and organizations that are committed to that mission. Too frequently, we see a number of organizations that are not led by Black and brown folks sitting back having the conversations about the ills of, and the problems and the achievement gaps of Black and brown students. That has to end. That has to be part of the agenda.
With that being said, and yet it is still key to have the right people at the table, because if you surround yourself with the thinking of the people that have been at the table, we're going to continue to produce the same outcome, which would be education agendas that don't close the academic achievement gap.
Exactly.
Which will be education agendas. We all know that last year some would call it a celebration of the 65th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, when we learned that our schools were still segregated. So having the right people at the table to, again, add value to the expertise that already comes, because we know what's going to come. I'm not doubting that at all. The question is, do they have the interest, the practical and the theoretical knowledge around what it takes to ensure that Black children achieve?
Dr. Balboa gave him a D+.
Say again?
Dr. Balboa gave him a D or a D+.
I want you to think of 1 to 3 policies that you absolutely, because I'm absolutely positive that incoming administration is watching us now. And our goal is to be helpful, not harmful, right? So I want you to think of 1 to 3 policies that you want to make sure that this administration considers so that we, again, accomplish the goal of achieving equity in education. Dr. Malvo, let your voice fill this airway.
Okay, well, 1 to 3, that's
1 to 3.
Well, first of all, because you have to talk about poverty, you have to talk about food, you have to talk about so many things. What I would say that wraparound services in our public schools. By wraparound services, I mean social workers, everything you need that a young person needs. We have too many stories of young people going hungry, being homeless and all that. So really wraparound services will be one of my strong recommendations. Secondly, send the best teachers to the worst schools. In other words, right now, the best teachers go to the best schools. And those who are at the worst schools, we get basically dummies coming to our schools. We want the best teachers at the best schools, the best teachers at the worst schools. And then the third thing, Dr. Whitaker, you mentioned it earlier when you talked about books. We have to attack curriculum. What are our young people seeing in the books that they have? When I went to wherever I went, high school, something, they had 2 Black people in the history book. One looked like they had escaped from an Uncle Ben's rice box. And the other one looked like they had escaped from a pancake box. Those were the Black people in the history book. Our young people need to see how great we are, how many wonderful things we've done. Talking about Paul Robeson, talking about Sadie Alexander. So we really have to tackle curriculum. And if there is some kind of executive order, frankly, there ought to be an executive order about curriculum. The Secretary of Education needs to be involved in curriculum development. We need to have a list of materials that should be in our school libraries or should be required reading.
I want to piggyback or pick up from Dr. Malvo, because one of the things that we did in Illinois is this evidence-based funding model, which actually takes every school and assesses for the children that you are servicing, that's the resources they need, be it counselors, social workers, nurses, how many teachers, class size, and said for a student in this particular district, you need X dollars to educate that child. This is how many dollars you're getting right now, and here's the gap. And so our state has now started putting in money to close that gap. So what I would like to see from a national perspective is a equitable funding mandate that we are required across the nation to determine what is it the baseline that every child needs, and then how much funding would that require, and then what's the gap, and then let's start to fill in that funding, because that'll take care of your wraparound services, our family engagement, ensuring we have the curriculum that we need to have in place. So that's my first one.
Dr. Lee, let me just ask you, would you say that Illinois, that we could serve as a model at least?
Absolutely. We could be a model for it, because that really grew out of years of recognizing the discrepancies in the funding.
All right,
so we're not there yet, but
Okay.
we have a model in place to get there. Now
All
we
right.
just need the funds to do it.
All right.
But then
Give me one more, and then I'll have everybody else give me two. For
okay, I can only pick one. Okay. An anti-racism education. That's anti-racism and really, because in the conversations we've been having with our white colleagues, the fact that people are now saying, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I thought I was being good, and I thought because I wasn't out there with the Ku Klux Klan that I was a good, just learning for them to even start to learn and to look through a different lens. So what that looks like in terms of anti-racism education, it's adults, children, across the board. But I think that needs to be an emphasis in this administration.
Are you referring to the training itself or the curriculum?
I'm referring to the adults
Yes.
and the children in school. And so the adults have to engage in that conversation in order for them to then start to look at the curriculum and making sure that curriculum reflects the full breadth and scope of who we are.
So I believe you're referring to the training associated with anti-racism. Is that correct?
That's the first step.
Okay. All right. Got it.
That would be my first step.
Gotcha.
You only let me pick one more, so I had to
All right.
whittle it down.
Right. All right. Dr. Glover.
Well, mine are very simple. First one is teacher pay. Teacher pay, make sure we just try to get equity in that, because we can't find enough good teachers. And so the discrimination and the financial system that pertains to teachers is just outrageous. So that's the first one. And the second one, we must tackle the systemic racism. Stop ignoring it. Stop playing games with it. Pretend like it doesn't exist and we have tiptoe around it. Just tackle the systemic racism. And then those are the two big issues that I see in the education system. We need to work on.
Thank you so much. Dr. Elston.
One of my favorite quotes is by Bishop Desmond Tutu, and he says, there comes a point at which we need to stop pulling people out of the river, and we need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And when I think about that, I think about the most important thing that needs to happen across any policy is centering it around students. Students demand change. They want credentials that matter. They want credentials that are respected. They want to get through college faster. They need easier to navigate models, and they need it to be more affordable. And I think that a policy that will ensure that happens is making sure that we are focused on some level of college or larger data transparency around what is it that we're measuring, because you have currently no way of knowing what's working and what isn't. And you've got to be sure to focus your time and your money and your resources on those things that are going to have real long-term value to students and communities. And so where there are gaps, then we fill them based on that information. And those individuals that are doing well, we continue to incentivize those institutions that have continued to been vanguards in this work. And so I think those are some of the most important pieces of an agenda.
Thank you so much. So grab your pen and piece of paper, because I'm getting ready to summarize what you just heard us say in terms of potential policy recommendations. And they are wraparound service in our education institutions, policies related to incentives so that the best teachers attend the work at the lowest performing schools, policies associated with attacking the curriculum and materials to make sure it reflects the spirits and the lives of children of color and children experiencing the impact of poverty. A funding model. We are advocating for the development of a more equitable funding model that is modeled out of the United States Department of Education. We are advocating for policy associated with addressing anti-racism education. We're advocating for teacher pay to be higher. We want to make sure that teachers are paid their worth. And we are also advocating for the tackling of systemic racism. And as Dr. Elston said in closing, a policy around measuring success. I'd like to add value to that, to suggest all due respect to any and all former U.S. Secretary of Education folks and their cabinets. I'm a cabinet member, so I know what it's like to be on the grind. But with all due respect, I think that we would all agree that our policies and practices have not resulted in statistically significant improvements and the social, emotional, or academic well-being of children of color and children experiencing the impact of poverty, including Black children. So at the risk of being redundant, policies around measuring success as opposed to stepping into place and throwing away everything that has ever occurred in every administration's tenure, we're going to close by recommending that we examine what works, that we build upon that, because we are the United States of America and we got this. I'd like to thank you again for your gift of time. I'd like to say thank you to the audience members who are saying, Doc, do not end this conversation. That's never happened before. So be on the lookout, be well, take care of yourself and your family, and be safe. Thank you.